Hey kids, it's Pastor Tony, and this is the next lesson in our series about simple stuff, where we take a look at all the stuff around us that we see every day, and we think about how that stuff can remind us of who God is, what He's like, and how we can be like Him. For today's lesson, we have to leave this room and go somewhere else in the building. I'm ready. Are you ready? Yeah, okay, then let's go. Let's go talk about some simple stuff. For today's lesson, we're going to talk about walls. They're in every building that we go inside of, our schools, our houses. Anywhere you go where there's a building, you will see a wall. Simple stuff, but they're all over the place. Today, we will specifically start by talking about that wall right there. Yeah, this huge wall, the side of the building. This wall is about 20 years old, and in the course of 20 years, that wall has taken a beating. I mean, in this room, we play a lot of games. And basketball is one of the games that gets played in here. And of course, any of us who play basketball, we like to make that half-court shot or the full-court shot. So as kids have tried over time to shoot that really far shot, sometimes the ball misses and it slams into the wall. Or as groups are running down the court, somebody's passing the ball, they throw it so hard, it slams into the wall. And it used to make a dent like the size of a basketball right in the side of the wall. Or somebody might be running, and they're running so fast they couldn't stop themselves, and they just jumped into the wall. That wall was taking a beating. The drywall that was behind the carpet was starting to cave in and had broken in some places. So we needed to do a project. We needed to take down all that gray carpet after we took off that brown strip that ran across the side to side. So somebody came in, they took off that strip, they pulled down all the carpet, and behind the carpet they found a beat up wall. They pulled all the drywall out, and then they put up some thicker, heavier boards. Yeah, they replaced the drywall with some really thick boards, so if somebody would run into the wall, it would kind of hit back a little bit. It wouldn't break if a basketball hit it really hard. And then someone else came in, and they put the carpet to cover up the wall. And this is what it looks like. Those guys did an awesome job because this was a big job that needed to be done. For some of us, if they had asked somebody like me to do that job, I would have said, it's impossible. I can't do that. We need the help of an expert who realizes how difficult it is, who is able to provide the help that we need. And that's what we're going to talk about for our Bible lesson today. A story about a wall, about an impossible task. And that story comes from Joshua chapters 2 through chapter 6. Let's take a few minutes to recap what's happened in Israel's history so far. Remember, God came to a man named Abraham and said, Abraham, I am going to give you a son. And from that son, you will end up being the father of a nation of people. And that nation will eventually get what I'm going to call the promised land. Well, before they got to that promised land, that nation of Israel, they were slaves in the land of Egypt. They were slaves for a long time, but God sent Moses to deliver the people from the land. He led the people out of Egypt. Remember, they faced the Red Sea. They ended up at Mount Sinai. There were 12 spies that went in to check out the promised land, and when they came back, those spies said, we can't do this. This job is too hard. So God made the people wander around in the wilderness, the desert, for 40 years. During those 40 years, there was a man named Korah who tried to lead a group of people against Moses to take over, but God kept Moses in charge. God continued to provide for the people food every single day with the manna that He would send. He kept their clothes and their shoes from wearing out. And after 40 years, the people were finally allowed to go into the promised land. Moses, though, his time as Israel's leader was done. So Moses was replaced by a man named Joshua. One of the first big obstacles that Joshua faced was a battle against the city of Jericho. Remember, Joshua sent 2 spies into Jericho to find out, what is this city like? How can we, a small nation, end up defeating this city? And they met a lady named Rahab who protected them, and she said, I'm going to protect you, but you got to promise that when your country, when your nation of Israel comes to take over Jericho, will you also protect my family? And they said they would. Well, then Israel, they cross over the Jordan River. God splits the river right down the middle, and they walk through on dry ground. And the nation is now ready to face Jericho. Jericho was known for having huge walls that surrounded the city, wide enough at the top that a whole chariot could ride on the wall. So, I mean, this thing is a wide wall, a tall wall, a long wall around the city. And I bet when some of the people of Israel looked at that wall, when they realized that this Jericho, this is the city we need to go in and fight against, and we need to beat them in battle, they might have thought to themselves, this is going to be impossible for us to do. So here's another group of people looking at a wall thinking, this is impossible. We need the help of an expert. We can't handle this ourselves. I love this story. And when I teach this story to kids, I love to have them act it out. Wouldn't it be fun if we could act this out right now? It'd be kind of tough. So instead of me acting out this story with you, I want you to watch this video, which will talk about just some of the details of Israel's battle against Jericho. And when it's done, we're going to get back together and we're going to talk about God. And what do we learn about God that can help us today when we face an impossible task? Watch this.
Israel came closer to their promised land. As they camped overlooking the fertile valley of their soon-to-be home, God showed them the strong city of Jericho. It was a fortified city with big, thick walls that prevented enemy soldiers from capturing it. For Israel to take possession of the land, this city had to be destroyed. Once again, God raised up a strong and courageous leader named Joshua. God told him to take charge of the people of Israel and lead them into the promised land. Joshua secretly sent 2 spies to scout out the land and the city. They were to report back to him. This would give him great information on which he could plan their attack. God told Joshua to put the armed men in front, followed by the priests blowing their trumpets and the Ark of the Covenant. At the back, another guard of soldiers were to stand. All these people were then to march around Jericho once a day for 6 days. The trumpets would blow, but the people were not allowed to make any noise, not even a word. Then, on the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times, and on Joshua's signal, shout as loud as they could. On the morning of the 7th day, Joshua, the army, the priests, and the people did exactly as the Lord commanded. On their 7th circle around the city, Joshua gave the signal, and the people erupted in shouts. Their yelling was met with a huge rumble as the city walls of Jericho began to break apart and tumble down. They burned the city to the ground, but kept all the gold and silver and placed it into the treasury of the Lord. They did, however, spare the lives of Rahab and her family, since Rahab helped the Israelite spies when they came to scout out the city. Once again, God gave the Israelites victory. A curse was placed on the city, and to this day, the walls of Jericho have never been rebuilt.
I'm sure to many of the people of Israel, when they first saw Jericho, the task seemed impossible. But it wasn't impossible for God. You see, God, He knew it would be a difficult task for Israel. And God, He was willing to provide help for Israel so that they could do what He told them to do. And all Israel needed to do was keep moving forward. Trust God. Do what God says. Do you ever face a task or a situation that seems impossible? Maybe it's your homework. And even week to week, day to day, it seems impossible. School is just impossible. Maybe it has something to do with your friends. It seems like this friendship, it is impossible to please this person. I feel like we're always arguing. We're always fighting. Maybe it's somebody in your family. Your mom and dad say that you need to get along with your brother and sister. You need to treat them with kindness. And you say to yourself, that is impossible. If you only knew what it was like to live with my brother or my sister. Maybe there's the chores that your mom and dad give you, like dusting around the house. You think, never going to get it done. They tell you to clean your room, and you look at your room and you go, that's not possible. Or they tell you that you need to take care of the pet, and you need to take it for a walk. Or you need to make sure it has food, or you need to clean up the litter box. And you think, this is impossible, I can't do it. Or then you read the Bible, and the Bible says, be kind to one another. Love your enemies. That seems impossible, to show gentleness to others when they don't do things the way you wanted to, or the way you thought they should do it. Don't just get upset and yell at them and blame them for the way they were doing things. Be gentle in your speech, in your attitude. Self-control. Sometimes when you're tired and it's been a long day, you start to lose self-control and you think, this is impossible. I just can't handle this situation anymore. When you face an impossible task or a situation that just seems like I can't handle this, you need to remember what we learned about God from this story. That God, He knows when things are difficult for us. And God, He is willing to provide the help that we need to be able to do what He wants us to do, what He calls us to do. And then we just need to obey Him and keep moving forward, and like Israel, trust that God's way is best. Maybe the next wall you see will be a reminder to you of the story that we talked about today, the story of Joshua, Israel, and those big walls of Jericho. And then that wall can remind you of the truth that we learned about God. He knows when things are difficult, and He's willing to help us do what He calls us to do. And the wall can remind you of who God is, what He does, and how we can be like Him. So go this week. Look at all the simple stuff around you. Think of how it can remind you of who God is, what He does, and be more like Him. And I'll see you next time. Bye.